Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our Lunch and Learn as we discuss Juneteenth and Black history here in Columbus. I am Damika Withers. I am the Chief Economic Equity and Inclusion Officer for the Franklin County Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Franklin County Board of Commissioners. And joining me today for this fun and educational discussion is historian and author Rita Fuller-Yates. Hi, Rita. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's always an honor.
Absolutely. Before we get started, I want to thank our Franklin County Board of Commissioners, Commissioner President Erica Crawley, Commissioner Kevin Boyce, and Commissioner John O'Grady for their support and leadership. I would also like to thank our Administrator Kenneth Wilson for his support and continued leadership for Team Franklin County. This is the second year our county leadership has stated our county employees will recognize Juneteenth as a paid holiday, and that was done by our Board of Commissioners. Rita, I want to be able to turn it over to you so you can introduce yourself, tell the audience about who you are and what you are doing before we get into our educational moment about Juneteenth and Columbus Black history. Everyone, please meet Rita Fuller-Yates.
Thank you, Damika. Such kind words, so encouraging to be a part of this conversation. This is our first year where we're celebrating this new holiday called Juneteenth. And what better way to celebrate it through learning Columbus Black history? I am excited to share again. My name is Rita Fuller-Yates, and by title, I am called a lifestyle expert, and I specifically do that to ensure that my voice is not in one lane. I wear many hats. I am a historian, a community historian. I am a lifestyle expert where you'll see me on local news, sharing lifestyle topics. I'm a professor at Franklin University, as well as I teach media and marketing. So I wear many hats, and depending on where I am at, that's why I call myself a lifestyle expert, because of the many hats that I wear. Some of the things that you'll see me doing is always community driven. I can talk a lot about everything, but when it comes to talking about myself, this is where I will find all types of complications of getting it out. So I'll do my best. So I do lots of projects in the community, all driven to help educate the African-American community and to ensure that we have a voice, to ensure that we constantly have resources, and that we constantly have information and mentors so that we constantly evolve. So everything I do is around that mission. But with that, I have been able to birth through that mission things like the Columbus Black History group on Facebook, as well as a project called 2020-200, where we sat with over 60 Black leaders from the past, the present, as well as young youth, which was considered the future. And we videotaped them, and we learned their story. We learned who they are as individuals and not just the leaders. That was our first initial project. Then George Floyd happened, and we took on a whole new arena of wanting to learn and teach local Black history. What we learned is that so many people know history, but we're not attached to it. And it's done purposely because it's so distant from who we are as everyday people. And what I've learned is that history that you can touch, local history, is something that inspires people through their everyday lives because it's people that they've normally been around, people who have sowed seed into their lives, people who have made a difference by just saying something inspiring to them. So I'm tapping into that industry of local history, and specifically when it comes to Ohio, because Ohio was unique. And I don't think many of us recognize that. So is it okay for me to share?
Yes, please go right ahead.
Okay. So hopefully I've been able to share with you enough about myself. If not, I do a lot better on Facebook. You can follow me on Facebook, and I share in content who I am, and it gives you a much better perspective, because obviously I still need to work on communicating.
Oh, no, that was really great. After you touched on a lot of points, and thank you for sharing your purpose and your mission at giving African Americans the voice, the information, connecting them to resources and mentors. And I love what you said about all the history that we have here in Ohio and how we're able to connect to individuals that are tangible, that we can touch, see, that we may have some connectivity to. And that is so important as we learn not just about Juneteenth, but all of Columbus's Black history. So I'm glad that you have prepared an informational slideshow for us to dive into that more. So I'm ready and geared up, and you can move forward when you're ready.
Okay, I'm excited, you guys.
Yes.
Now, one of the things that I always share when I'm talking about Columbus Black history is the relationship of recognizing that we were a unique state, that we are free, we were a free state. But before we even talk about that, a lot of what I'll talk about may create some synergy inside of you as an individual that you may need to pay attention to. And this may be an area that you could follow up on, or maybe receive some more information, maybe obtain some guidance about that trigger. But some of the information I'll share is not going to be easy to hear. But so often, American history has been created into heroism, and not necessarily the truth. And the stories have been from one perspective. So if all the people involved in the story was all at the table, able to tell their piece of the story, then that changes the whole perception of the story. But since it always came from one lens, it sometimes spoke differently, even to the culture that's in the story. So I use this example of, before I get started, so people can see what happened in America, I use the selfie analogy. And I basically say, let's say every culture, let's say Black, white, Native, and Latino were all at the table. And at the end of the meeting, we decided to take a selfie, as we all do today, to just celebrate the occasion of us gathering. So we take the selfie, and we all knew that we were there, and we all understood the stories and the perceptions of the information that we were sharing regarding our culture. But then at the end, somebody takes that picture and they crop out everybody in the photo but the white person. That really is American history today. So we were all there, all our stories was at the table, but the only story that was able to be told was the white story, and it was told from their perspective. So now we have an opportunity to share our own stories. Some of them will be heavy for especially the white culture, but where I tell the Black culture when it comes to history is having a little sensitivity, knowing that America not only hurt us, but it hurt them as well. So we've got to be able to take some steps back, evaluate what happened, and see what it is that we can do to create better community moving forward. So what is Juneteenth? Juneteenth, I'm gonna do it in a simple version, in an elementary version. So most of us identify Juneteenth with the Emancipation Proclamation. And although that is a part of the story, Emancipation Proclamation started the conversation and was a threat from President Lincoln to the Confederates that said, look, let's just end slavery. Well, these rebel states wasn't having it. They were like, we've been here all this time. We've been making wealth. We're not listening to you. So of course, that made him create an order. The order is called Emancipation Proclamation. That order was created in 63, January of 1863. Now, keep in mind, in Columbus, Ohio, in January of 1863, we were a free state since 1803. But before I talk about Ohio, let me sum up Juneteenth. So the 13th Amendment was signed in 1865. And so many of us confuse what ended slavery. We always say Emancipation Proclamation ended slavery. Well, that's not the case. Emancipation Proclamation was the event that occurred on June 19th, 1865 in Galveston, Texas, that the Union soldiers would show up at their plantation and say, "You're free." Well, we all know the juicy story is that Emancipation Proclamation was signed 2.5 years prior. So we sit and say, "Oh, they didn't know that emancipation ended slavery, so they were still enslaved." Well, no, that was just an order. And in most cases, you want to follow the order. But Texas could have cared less because they just received their independence, or I should say, received commitment to United States 20 years prior. They belonged to Mexico in 1845. So as we can know now, government takes time to be established. It takes time to create leadership. It takes time to understand who the leadership is and who we're listening to. And Texas was not respecting the United States. They had their own government. So when we showed up on that day, and we, of course, the Union told the plantation slaves that they were free, they created a celebration that we now know as Juneteenth. Originally, it was called the Jubilee, the celebration. But now we know it's called Juneteenth. Now we understand why we celebrate it. But what I want to make sure that you're really clear on is Emancipation Proclamation was the order. It literally started the conversation. December of 1865 is what ended the conversation when the 13th Amendment was signed. So when you are in the room with your historians, make sure you have those two entities correct. Emancipation Proclamation did not end slavery. Now, what was going on in Ohio in 1863? Now think about this. In 1803, Ohio becomes a state. Prior to this becoming a state, we only had the 13 colonies, where why we celebrate the 4th of July is we became independent from the British. We understand that, right? The American history books does a good job explaining that. What they don't always explain is that Ohio was the test tube babies. It was the first state that would create what it means for free Black people and free white people to live together. That was in 1803. So never in the state of Ohio has there been enslavement. So if you were born in Ohio, you have never been a slave. You were not a slave. And so often we miss those time frames because we group ourselves with other cities and states. So after Ohio became a state, come 1810, we literally had 43 free Black people living here in Columbus. Aggie Lewis was the first African-American drayman in Columbus, and he created a momentum for the community that saw Black people differently. Now, keep in mind, the rest of the country is enslaved at this time. Here in Columbus, Ohio, I'm gonna name just two African-American men that were making a difference in our community at a time when everyone else was enslaved. So let's talk a little bit about this guy. His name is David Jenkins, and he was born in Virginia in 1811. He came to Columbus in the 1830s, and in 1840, he started the first African-American private school for African-American children, where he, as well as African-American leaders from the community, gathered and taught the children. Now, at this time, we lived in downtown Columbus from on a street called Water Street. Water Street is where Scioto is today. Many of us go down there and walk through the park. That community was primarily a mixed community of Blacks as well as Italians, Germans, and as long as there wasn't a lot of Black people living in Columbus, Ohio, we were always accepted. David Jenkins would not only become a leader for the African-American community, but he was also the man responsible for the first African-American disconnected. Do y'all still see me on the phone?
Yes, we can still see you.
Okay. The slide presentation left?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know what's going on with that. Okay, so let me bring it back.
Okay.
Can you see it okay now?
No. It's here. It is coming. It is up. There it is. It is still. So David, you're on the David Jenkins slide.
Yep, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So just to sum up David Jenkins' significance is he would create the first African-American newspaper for the state of Ohio called the Palladium of Liberty. He would also work as one of the conductors in the Underground Railroad. John T. Ward, many of him may be familiar with his name. The Ward family actually has the oldest African-American business, not only in the city, not only in the state, but in the country, called E.E. Ward Moving Company. He had a farm in Whitehall in the 1850s. He would work for City Hall in the 1870s as a janitor. And who knows where the Ohio Theater is today? Well, that in the 1870s was the City Hall. And that is where he would work in downtown Columbus, where right across the street, he worked from this guy. This guy's name is James Poindexter. And in 1860s, he would have not only a business, but he would have a business in downtown Columbus, not only in downtown Columbus, but on High Street, right across the street from the State House in the 1860s. Now, I know I'm always proud to tell that story because so often today, we don't recognize that we come from downtown. And even in the 1850s, excuse me, during the 1850s, we owned primarily all of the property from High Street to where 4th Street is today. So I take a pause there all the time because I need for you to visualize what that.
Mm-hmm.
So we owned a lot of land in downtown Columbus in the mid 1800s when the rest of the country was enslaved.
Mm-hmm.
So that resonates a lot when it comes to how Columbus African Americans, if we understood who we were rooted in, I believe that we would have a lot more better stance in who we are and who we are to become. Because we started out as an expectation to somewhat fail, but we constantly evolved. And that's basically what my story is when it comes to sharing African-American success, is proclaiming everything outside of slavery. So we recognize that slavery happened. But here in Ohio, and I've been a part of Ohio, I have a legacy that's been a part of Ohio since before Ohio was established as the Northwest Territory. So many of us were not even enslaved. That's another part of the story, that if you come from Ohio, many of us have families that were never enslaved. They were a part of the Northwest Territory. They were here originally before everyone else migrated here. And many of them were natives or a part native. So keep in mind that Ohio was unique for a reason. Now, when we start talking about Jubilee, I had to state and set the stage for Columbus, Ohio, because when it came to Civil War, everyone else was in the country enslaved. That's what they were fighting for during this war, was to become free. Well, we were free. So many of the soldiers that came and fought during the Civil War came from Ohio, including Black soldiers. Many of those soldiers were at a place called Camp Chase here on the west side of Columbus, where at the time in the 1862, we only had 18,000 people living in the city of Columbus. There were over 30,000 soldiers manning at this camp. One of the things that we were responsible for during the war was the supplies. So we had a lot of weight regarding the war on the city. So at the end of the war, come April 9th, 1865, we were excited to just be done with the war, get our men back home, and get back to just living a normal lifestyle of freedom. But of course, come April 14th, a huge catastrophe happened. Abraham Lincoln was shot. So Abraham Lincoln was not only the hero to the white people, but he was hero to the Black people as well. Because keep in mind, all that we knew as far as politics was there was a president that came into the office, started talking freedom, signed an order, and at the end of the war, there was freedom. And so, of course, we were excited. We wanted to celebrate this amazing man. So here in Columbus, in Ohio, the city of Gallipolis got ahead of the game and started celebrating freedom, which is known as Emancipation Proclamation freedom, as early as 1863. And they did this every single year to this very day. So Ohio is home to the oldest celebration of Juneteenth in the country. So I always am proud to say that because I think many of us don't know that. And let me say this, many of us don't recognize why we're the oldest. Jubilee happened in 1865. What made us the oldest is we recognized when President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Remember, we were free for 60 years, meaning that we were educated and we had private schools, we could read, we could write, and we understood politics. So we understood when he signed the Emancipation Proclamation that we were on our way to freedom. So we started celebrating immediately. But what I want to bring to your attention is in Columbus, there still was some challenges because of the death of Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln's body came to Columbus, Ohio, when It was one of 20 cities that was selected for the body to visit. And 50,000 people would view his body at the State House. Now, in Galveston, Texas, in June, that occurrence happened, but Abraham Lincoln had just died April 14th of that same year, which was only 6 weeks prior. So the city of Columbus knew and understood Jubilee and understood wanting to celebrate this occasion, but our hero had just died. And our hero had not just died from the state of him being a president, but we just created this state called Ohio and these other states in the Northwest Territory that he promised that he was going to keep safe, that he promised that Black and white people will live amongst each other. And now he's dead. So there was fear that was starting to creep up in these now free states. This is just a photo of him and us honoring him when he came to Columbus, Ohio on April 22nd. And then this is a photo of the businesses and the way they looked that day when the president came to Columbus. Now, keep in mind, we were gathering to celebrate the end of the war when this happened to President Lincoln. So our city was already spending funding on decorating buildings and getting the State House lawn ready for a big party. But then this turned into more of a catastrophe than a celebration. So here in Columbus, we didn't celebrate emancipation, or I should say, we had two forms of celebrating this particular occurrence. The white people would celebrate in January of every year, and they would call it the Emancipation Proclamation of President Lincoln. So January of every year, they would gather in parks, primarily the State House, and they would celebrate, create a preacher would come and possibly speak for a couple hours, and they would create a celebration not regarding freedom, but about President Lincoln. But then in September of every year, the Black community would gather and they would call it the colored celebration of the emancipation. And in particular, when I do my research, I look at newspapers, I look for books, I look for firsthand accounts of people who were in the space at this time. And what was shared with me was that it was always celebrated year after 1863. But as far as it getting media attention, that didn't happen until 1871. Now, Black people would gather here in Columbus. This would be a huge celebration of thousands of people coming throughout the country here to our little town to celebrate this wonderful occasion that we call emancipation. Now, of course, with us being a little different as African Americans, some of the newspapers did indicate that it was a segregated occasion for the Negroes, but they still did not limit the white people from wanting to peek into the occasion. So they said on the days of the emancipation celebrations, it was always frequented to have the windows, the drapes, and the doors with a little peek of interest. So there was always something that white people was interested in regarding our community. And so often around entertainment. We all know we're interesting people. Also, when it comes to our fashions, they made note of that. We wear exceptional clothing. We do things exceptionally well and different and exciting. The newspaper had indicated, I'd never seen people so happy Again, we're celebrating the success of freedom. And I don't know if they can even connect to that emotion. And I think that's what so often they're seeing when we're celebrating this occasion. Now, in 1921, this was just a newspaper article that I found that 2,000 people in Columbus, Ohio took part in this celebration. They would do this at memorial halls. They would also have celebrations at the YMCA, Spring Street YMCA, which was a segregated YMCA in downtown Columbus, because we lived in downtown Columbus. We had a church in downtown Columbus until segregation. Once we were segregated is when we started moving to the east side of Columbus, which we now know as Bronzeville. But this was one of the places where teens would gather, and this would be what it would look like. And again, this was an occasion that we would wear our Sunday's best. Now, we would normally gather at parks such as the fairgrounds, which at the time is where Franklin Park is today. We would also gather at Goodell Park, at Maryland Park. We were there for over 30 years at Maryland Park. It actually became known as the Emancipation Proclamation Park before it became the Maryland Park. And we would also frequent, now we frequent in downtown Columbus at the Scioto, and in one where we call downtown, Black Downtown on Mount Vernon. Now, I specifically put that date 1865 to 1936 because after 1936, the newspaper stopped talking about Emancipation Proclamation. In Columbus, Ohio, you haven't even heard me mention the word Juneteenth because it didn't really exist. We literally had two celebrations: the white celebration that was more about President Lincoln, and then the Black celebration that was about freedom. And we understood until about 1936 what that value was, because we celebrated it every single year. But it's my assumption that the reason, and there was no indication in the newspaper as to what happened, but it's my assumption that other circumstances started taking priority. And in a Black community, when you're in a fight, we don't get the chance to talk about history and bring history into our forefront. So often we just get to put all our energy into what it is that we're fighting. And at the time, come the 1950s, we were going through a thing called redlining, where our communities were being split up, primarily because the segregated communities had created so much wealth. So now remember, this segregated community only was created because Ohio was free because of the Great Migration. The Great Migration in the early 1900s, late 1800s, created a lot of Black people from the South to move to Columbus. And that is really what caused a lot of the strife. Columbus didn't have a problem living and being amongst Black people, as long as there wasn't a lot of us. So once the Great Migration happened, they had to segregate us. So we lived on our side of town, they lived in their parts of town. But then we became successful. We created our own schools, our own churches, our own hospitals, our own attorneys, our own safety patrol, everything, fire stations. We were successful. So what happens with success is the money stays within the wealth of the community, which was good for the Black community, but not so good for the city of Columbus or the white community. So they had to break that up. Money is green. So that's when they started redlining. They redlined, they came through the communities, the Black communities. They specifically identified the successful segregated Black communities and literally placed a freeway through those communities, split them up, and at the end of the hour, we had to figure out who we were once again. Then civil rights happened in the 1960s, and we lost our leader in 1969. So I believe these things took preference over celebrating Emancipation Proclamation. But then in 1991, Mr. Shabazz brought the conversation back to Columbus. He is the bookstore owner of the JAMA Books, and he is an advocate of the Afro-centric school and the concept behind teaching what it means to understand Africa teachings. He started the conversation with the city, and we started having Juneteenth celebrations. This was happening at Franklin Park. This was happening successfully for a few years. I remember attending a couple of them. Again, this was in the 1990s, when it doesn't seem like it was a long time ago. But keep in mind, there wasn't very many Black activities happening in the city for Black communities. So this was an accomplishment. But this is where the conversation sometimes gets tough. Revitalization of Columbus was created by our mayor, the first African-American mayor of Columbus, Mayor Coleman. And he saw the value of creating Juneteenth as a celebration every year. They started giving funding and dollars to this celebration. So we again was able to be the example of what does it mean for African Americans to gather on one accord and celebrate us, celebrate freedom, and have a space to explain our history. But then this occurrence happened. These occurrences keep happening. The negative occurrences that keep happening at our Juneteenth festivities. Now, many leaders, historians will say, well, why are you broadcasting that? Especially when we're talking to white people. Well, I am called to broadcast this because now we have to think about what Juneteenth means moving forward as we celebrate together as a community. And me as a Black person was sometimes having to deal with myself when it comes to what is Juneteenth and what does it mean to celebrate freedom when freedom has been, shouldn't say freedom, slavery has been over, and we continue to remind ourselves of slavery and not the accomplishments that came out of slavery. So I focus more of my history on the accomplishments of slavery and not necessarily what happened during slavery. The Juneteenth celebration sometimes falls in line with wanting to focus on slavery. And I believe that with us being a state that was the example of white and Black people living together, we have an opportunity right now to create something new, to create a new brand, a new awareness of what does it mean to celebrate Juneteenth together as communities and not just make it a Black thing. Or how do we even open the door to white people so that they feel more comfortable or confident being in the space celebrating Juneteenth? Because I've heard Black people say, well, that's our holiday. So how do we move forward as Ohioans and celebrate this thing that we now know as a federal holiday? And I really believe that we as a city leaders of all diversity need to come together to create this new holiday and become the example of what does it mean to celebrate, what does it mean to historically preserve, what does it mean to share the African-American experience, and what does it mean to pay homage to the African-American community. Because that's the other fear that the African-American community has with giving away our holiday, is white people will market it and try to create wealth from it. We're afraid of that. We understand this holiday is about spiritual, historical, and the value of African Americans coming out of something that was impossible to survive. But we did that. We did that successfully to where we're sitting here talking with you today. But with that, we're held accountable. So our last 15 minutes, I like to challenge you and ponder the question of what does it mean to celebrate Juneteenth in Columbus, Ohio? What does it mean for communities to gather and celebrate the African-American community? Because as much as we believe that that's easy to do, it is not. That's why we get 1 month out the year to be celebrated, because it's not easy to celebrate Black people, including Black people celebrating Black people. So we have to practice. And so often, this holiday could really be the occurrence that helps bridge the disconnections that we have in America today. And I believe that we can use this as a tool and a resource so that we can say, look, let's feed the community with the wealth from this event, but at the same time, let's learn to recognize the success of the African-American community and come out of slavery. So these are the celebrations that I would suggest if you're looking to go to a few Juneteenth opportunities. I would suggest going to the Juneteenth on the Ave, which is on Mount Vernon, on June 18th. There's one at the COSI on June 19th. And there's one at Scioto River, the festival, Juneteenth festival on the Scioto River on June 18th and June 19th. So this gives you some ideas of where it is that you can go to celebrate this wonderful thing called Juneteenth. What I believe that Columbus has is, starting as a test tube babies, we have the opportunity to continue the mission of being test tube babies and creating the momentum for something new. Because believe me, many cities and states are struggling to identify the best way to recognize what now is a federal holiday called Juneteenth without messing up. And we could definitely be that example. So let's talk. In Columbus, the census of the Juneteenth holiday and events aren't consistently positive. What can we do as a community collectively to change the narrative?
Ms. Rita, thank you so much for sharing your presentation and the rich history about Juneteenth and how it relates to Franklin County and the city of Columbus. Thank you for offering that information and that educational opportunity. I've learned some things. I know, I'm sure our audience has as well. And while they're pondering the question that you asked the audience at the end, we do have one question in the chat, and the question is from Deborah, who asks, so what happened to enslaved people living in this territory before the statehood of Ohio?
So this part of the country wasn't a part of the United States. We only had the 13 colonies before this part of the country even became a conversation. This was native land. And before we're talking about before the American Revolutionary War, this was promised to never become a part of the United States. But then the United States got greedy, wanting to create wealth. And at the time, the only way to create wealth was through land. So we, of course, started battling the natives for this land. And even during the Revolutionary War, natives helped fight along with African Americans. There were 5,000 natives and African Americans that fought during the Revolutionary War that many of us don't even know. So when, again, enslaved people were enslaved, there was still free Black people. There's always been free Black people. So keep in mind, and this is the story and why it is so important for you to do your own DNA. I know many of us are afraid of it because of the DNA cells being duplicated and all of the rumors that go around. But this is what I've said about that. Anytime you give your blood to the hospital, anytime you give your blood to anyone, it's at risk to being sold. It's at risk to being in a place where it could be duplicated or whatever. But what this process does is DNA allows for you to peek into your life. It gives you an insight into who you are. And so often as Black people, we run from who we are because it's scary to discover that many of us are white. I'm 48% white. And especially in the lineage, if you have a lineage from Ohio, I have a lineage that comes from the Northwest Territory. So I wasn't enslaved. And that DNA helps support that. So I'm a big advocate of those individuals who, if you have a long legacy in Ohio, for you to really look at your DNA, and you can really look at us too and see our fair skin. In most instances, why it is, we were free.
Thank you, Ms. Rita. You shared a lot of history with us today. Why do you think it's important for Black history to be Americans' history? A lot of times, and I think you mentioned it in your presentation, that Black history a lot of times isn't celebrated. We get Black History Month, but why is this a 365 big deal that Black history is American history?
Well, so often when I explain the selfie example, we're now backtracking those stories. So we've always been a part of the story from the very beginning. It was just told from one perspective. Now we get our own voice. And it's so important that we begin backtracking those stories, collecting all of them, and showing our dynamics from the very beginning. Because with them taking selfies, basically that's all white people were doing. They're just heroism. They were just taking selfies of everything they did and creating a lie around it, making sure nobody else was in the photo so that it looked like they were the only ones. Well, now they're not going to go back and track Black history to look for our good stories. That's our job. So that's where I hold the Black community accountable. And I say, okay, now I can talk about them and make sure they understood where they were wrong. But where we're accountable is making sure we grab our stories and begin telling them, going back to that oral history of our grandmothers and our great grandmothers, getting them back in our cars as grandmothers, because I've heard grandmothers say, well, my grandchildren aren't interested in that. Well, neither were we, but we didn't have much of a choice. You put them in that car, you go on columbusblackhistory.org, where we've literally created 12 virtual sites, and you drive your children around to those 12 sites. If nothing else, and talk about those 12 sites. And where I'm gonna also expand is we do Columbus Black History tours now. And you can find them on columbusblackhistory.org as well. And one of the things I talk about is using myself as Columbus Black History as the example. And I literally show sites of my childhood to the people on the tour so that they can see they are history. When you did something significant in a building as a teenager, that's history. You can take your children back to that building and tell them, this is where this happened. And then when you perish, that building can still be here. And that's a representation of your grandchildren's touching you. And that's the thing white people don't want us to know about. Statues in buildings, in streets named after them, they got confidence. I met a girl yesterday who's an Agler. Who's heard of Agler Road? Yesterday, I met her and she didn't tell me. She had her name on her badge. And I looked and I was like, are you an Agler? And she was like, yeah. Now, mind you, she's married. She still is an Agler. She says, oh no, I'm not changing my name. Why do you think that is? She knows the power of her name. And that's the thing that Black people have to get to. Our legacy is what they're trying to bury now. Because it can be one of us that's great. But when you start talking about 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, there's a problem. So let's just pay attention to what our responsibility is in the fight. And that's why sharing Columbus Black history is American history.
Thank you, Ms. Rita. We have about 5 minutes left. You shared at the end, towards the end of your presentation, the Juneteenth celebrations that are happening throughout the weekend. There are also ones that are happening in Rusterville and Gahanna and Reynoldsburg. These are opportunities for everyone to enjoy the Juneteenth celebration and why we do it. Can you expand upon more why it is for everybody to come in, and we want to be able to call people into the Black community. We want to be able to practice some inclusivity and share that power and share that voice. What do you think folks should look for or walk around and say, let me engulf myself in these celebrations and coming in, and maybe I have some hesitation in doing so. Why do you think it's important, and what should they do as part of those celebrations?
I love that question. Thank you for asking that question, Damika, because I think that will help people find some comfortability at these events. Honestly, this is a great time to be curious. White people, this is a good time to be quiet and learn. This is not, this is a celebration. You should come ready to have a good time, but also recognize this is a good time to ask questions. See us, because so often we have been in the same space, recognizing that when we leave, we still was not seen. And that's just historically our perspective. So if we can just go ready to celebrate, ready to ask questions, and ready to integrate, knowing you may feel uncomfortable, I think those could be the first start. And then I think, Damika, we just got some work to do as far as branding, and how do we create this to be more inclusive so that everyone feels comfortable. Not to talk about them, no, we ain't gonna do that. But how do we make it inclusive so they feel comfortable celebrating us?
Thank you. Thank you so much for that answer. You said something that resonated with me so well about, many times we left rooms or left spaces and still felt as we haven't been seen. And this is the opportunity to see us, hear us, feel us, support us. And that's just the beginning, right? So Juneteenth is a celebration of everything that you discussed about the emancipation of our African Americans being enslaved and being able to celebrate that, but also the support. This is a 365 opportunity to carry this out, moving forward, moving past this weekend and asking those questions, engulfing yourself and listening and hearing us. So I appreciate the information that you share. There's people in the chat on Facebook saying that this was valuable information. They really care. I just want to read one of the quotes. Thank you for sharing your perspective and role our city and state have played in the history of this holiday. This information you have shared can go a long way to promote understanding and inclusion for celebration in this important day. So thank you, Ms. Rita. Ms. Rita, where can individuals find you? You talked about the Columbus Black History Tours. You are an author. So tell the audience where they can find you and how they can engulf themselves more in the history here in Franklin County and what you have gathered as a historian.
So we have made it easier for everyone. Everything we do is Columbus Black History. So we have a website, columbusblackhistory.org, where we have the virtual sites, as well as where we sell the book. We just launched a children's book. So that's also available. Just a Little Girl from Longstreet, which is my depiction of the historical figures that lived on my street, Longstreet. And then Columbus Black History on Facebook, making sure that you engage on there. There's close to 20,000 people on there, and they engage and they love sharing memories.
Yeah,
and then the tours. That's really what we're promoting right now. They started just 2 weeks ago, and they've been creating a lot of momentum, a lot of conversation. And again, one of the things that we do on there is we teach people how to celebrate us. So we pull out pom-poms and we have the white people screaming and the Black people screaming. We play music, we watch videos. So it's an experience about history so that you can leave wanting to change and make a difference in history for our children tomorrow.
Ms. Rita, thank you. We are out of time. It is 1 o'clock on the dot. I want to thank the audience for joining us, and Ms. Rita, especially you, for sharing all of the history that you have shared with us today and being able to teach all of us what Black history is and what Juneteenth is, and creating spaces that includes everyone to celebrate us, for us, and supporting us as Black people. Happy Juneteenth, everyone. Enjoy and get out and celebrate this important time. And most importantly, learn and celebrating and supporting your Black community. Ms. Rita, thank you so much. And I hope you have a great weekend and happy Juneteenth.
You too. And thank you again for having me.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.